at 2 p.m. Right now, we're talking to a very, very special guest. His name is Alan Mendenhall. And Alan is an awesome guy. We're going to be talking about the Judge Brett Kavanaugh, what's happened over the weekend, lots of new things developed. He's Associate Dean at Faulkner University, Thomas Goode School, Jones of Law. Let me repeat that. The Thomas Goode Jones School of Law, Executive Director of the Blackstone and Burke Center for Law and Liberty. Great to have you, Alan. I'm so excited about what happened this weekend.
Well, it was very exciting. I mean, starting on Friday and going through Saturday, there was many people watching the Senate floor as they were watching college football, which
I think
sort
so.
of a big surprise for football Saturday.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that's really something. When you're not going to watch Alabama and Auburn play, that's really something. So just kind of walk us through what happened. Let's start at the beginning. What happened? It was a crazy circus.
Well, yeah, if we want to start at the beginning, we may as well go back all the way to July, which is when President Trump nominated Kavanaugh to be an Associate Justice on the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. This was after the announcement of the retirement of Judge Anthony Kennedy, for whom Kavanaugh had actually clerked years ago. The Senate Judiciary Committee began its confirmation hearings on Kavanaugh on September 4th. In the intervening period in July, Senator Feinstein's office received an allegation of improper activity, namely sexual assault against Judge Kavanaugh from a professor of California named Christine Blasey Ford. This information was allegedly leaked, probably from Senator Feinstein's office, but was not brought up during Kavanaugh's confirmation hearings, nor during his interviews with the individual senators. Of course, after the Senate Judiciary Committee held its hearings, and just shortly before the votes were supposed to take place, it was announced that Kavanaugh's nomination would not proceed until the Senate Judiciary Committee could interview Ford and Kavanaugh. So they scheduled a committee hearing for September 24th, and after that, there was a vote to send Kavanaugh's nomination to the entire floor of the Senate. And then what we saw actually last Friday was a vote on cloture. So it was a motion to vote cloture, which resulted in a 51-49 vote in favor of cloture, and that vote was pretty much along party lines. And that ensured that a full vote by the Senate would take place the following day, which was Saturday. And on Saturday, the Senate voted to confirm Justice Gorsuch. Very shortly after that, Saturday evening, Justice Gorsuch was sworn in by Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Anthony Kennedy. And today, Judge Kavanaugh now sits as Justice Kavanaugh, and he is a Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Now, there are a lot of other things we could talk about that happened during that period, but that is sort of the gist.
Well, let me ask you a question. Had this whole circus not been brought up, how do you think things would have ended? Would it have been the same, different? Would he have received more or less votes? What do you think?
I think he would have received a lot more votes. I think his vote line would have been somewhere along what Justice Gorsuch's was, and I think that the sexual assault allegations, I mean, if it had been some other kind of scandal, maybe there would have been, people would have turned their heads. But because of the gravity of that particular accusation, I think, the vote lines were not quite what they were for Gorsuch. So Gorsuch was confirmed with a 54-45 vote, and of course, I think it's 50-48 Kavanaugh, so much closer for Kavanaugh. The only Democrat siding with Kavanaugh was Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who would have been politically doomed going into these midterm elections had he not voted for the confirmation. I think, as I've mentioned on a previous show, Joe Manchin is facing Patrick Morrisey, who is a popular conservative former Attorney General of West Virginia, and had Manchin not voted to confirm Kavanaugh, he very likely would have lost that election. And he still may, but it looks like there are a lot of people that are sort of middle-of-the-road people in West Virginia who saw Manchin vote for Kavanaugh and thought, okay, this is a guy I can still vote for. This is a guy that still represents me.
Well, he seems to represent the old Democrat Party. You know, I told you I have family members who were Democrats, and I was growing up. And that was my dad and his side of the family, and then a lot of my mother's side of the family, Democrats as well. But for the most part, my mother and my grandparents were Republicans when I was growing up. But there was an old Democrat Party. I know my great-grandfather used to have, pictures of Democrat presidents in his living room alongside pictures of Jesus, you know.
Well, remember, there used to be a Jefferson-Jackson dinner that the Democrats used to hold every year, and now they canceled it because it's too politically incorrect to hold a Jefferson-Jackson dinner, which is just telling as to where the Democratic Party has shifted. And speaking of Manchin, I think you're right about him being one of those few remaining centrist Democrats. Another of whom I ate at the varsity in Atlanta this weekend. We went to Atlanta, my kids and family, and we were up there visiting with my parents, and we went to the varsity for dinner, and there was a big picture of Zell Miller up there eating a chili dog, and I thought, the Democrats like these just do not exist anymore. But one thing you might want to watch with Joe Manchin is whether he flips to Republican if he does get reelected. And I know that to some people may sound extreme, but to put it into context, Jim Justice is the governor of West Virginia, and in 2015, he switched. So he ran as a Democrat, and then shortly thereafter he switched back to a Republican. So he's gone from Democrat to Republican, Democrat to Republican, and so it's not unheard of in West Virginia. Before 2015, Governor Justice was a Republican, and then he was a Democrat from 2015 to 2017, and then got elected, and then from 2017 to now, he's been a Republican again. So
well, then you got to,
West Virginia's got some interesting politics.
They do, and then you've got to remember Hillary Clinton ticked a bunch of them off when she started talking about their God and their guns.
Right.
Got that going against them.
West Virginia had been solidly Democratic for a long time, and it wasn't the type of Democrats that you see going to the polls today. They were sort of, I'll call them old school Democrats, but they were sort of, the mining types, the hard-working coal miners, and people that worked jobs in industry, and they were hardworking Christian people, and they just don't feel represented anymore by the Democratic Party. And you can see just based on presidential elections how red the state of West Virginia has gone, let's say, over the last 10 years.
Well, I'd like to get your opinion. We're diving just a little bit into the Democrat Party right now, but I would like to have your opinion on this. The Democrats have just been saying for years, that the Republicans are split. They can't get along with each other, blah, blah, blah. But don't you see this happening within the Democrat Party as well?
I do, and I see it going down lines of who could be the most radical. I mean, when you've got people like Bernie Sanders that are up there actively promoting socialism, we have to keep in mind that the Holocaust killed 6 million Jews. Well, socialism and communism, not that this is a fun thing to have to compare, but socialism and communism killed over 90 million people. I mean, it's extraordinary that there would be anybody actively promoting socialism.
Because it's racist. It's racist. This is racist. I mean, it's to the ultimate racist. When that many people die, it's racism.
No, people were killed in mass by Pol Pot, by Mao, by Stalin. It's got one of the most horrifying track records of any system in human history. And if you just look at what's going on in Venezuela now, Venezuela was a functional society, and it has descended into absolute and total chaos now, where people can't even afford to buy one pill of Tylenol. People who are sick can't afford to get antibiotics. It has driven people into abject poverty, and the country is now run by crime mobs and not by actual civil government. So if that's the direction that people want to head in, I don't really know what to say about that. I nothing about that recommends itself to me. I think that's just horrifying, and what's even more horrifying is that anybody would want to head in that direction in our country.
But let me ask you a question about this, and it could possibly happen. Two scenarios: either the Democrat Party will implode, or will there be a surgence of the old Democrats coming out, splitting the party? Could that possibly happen? Kind of like a Tea Party? Kind of.
Yeah, kind of like a Tea Party. You know,
Yeah.
I don't see that happening. I really don't. I think what would be more likely to happen is that, I mean, it's hard to say because there's so much that's difficult to predict. I mean, we've got mass migration coming into the country, and we have people that are coming from countries like Mexico that are basically coming to America to be part of the entitlement program. They want to come here, and many of them, yes, want to work hard to make a better life for themselves, but there are also people that don't. There also are some criminals, and there are some people that are trying to skirt our laws in order to gain benefits. You know, I don't want to generalize and say that applies to everybody, but there is a large segment of people that are coming in here for those reasons, and their children will be born here and will be United States citizens, and they come with different values and different priorities, and they will fundamentally transform the way that Americans are represented in the Senate and the House. So I really, it's hard to say, it's hard to predict. On the other hand, some Spanish immigration comes from communities that are much more socially conservative than the United States. People forget how radically left the United States seems to a lot of the world. I mean, to the Muslim world, the United States seems like it's all represented by a Hollywood elite. To China, the United States seems like we are extremely socially lax and liberal. To much of Africa, the United States seems like it is extremely on the left. And these are all regions where population is increasing dramatically, whereas in the United States, population is decreasing. So I find that Americans have become somewhat insular and unaware of the global trends, which are to the right generally. And so no matter what happens in America, I think we'll see Christianity flourish throughout the world, and I think we'll see sensible, moral, and conservative principles proliferating in some places, and I hope it's here. I hope it's in the United States. But if it's not, you can't take these principles that exist from time out of mind and time immemorial and say that they're just not going to exist somewhere. They are the perennial issues. They are the traditions and customs and cultures that everyone will return to at some point. And let's just hope that America can be restored to them before we lose our place in the world to other superpowers.
I hope so. You know, other countries have actually referred to us as being like Babylon in the biblical days. You know, where we're turning from God. You know, you hear that. Absolutely.
You do.
And then also
tend to look at Europe and say, oh, well, you know, let's go look at Europe. Europe's left-wing this, yours like, well, if you look at Europe over the past 5 to 6 years, I think you'll find that Europe has taken a sharp turn to the right. And now most European countries, as far as percentage-wise in the population, are probably more conservative than the United States. And that's come at a time when the United States, under basically the 8 years that Obama was president, America took a very rapid turn to the left, and Obama was able to populate the federal government with lots of far left figures, and some of them became part of what we now call the deep state, but really that just means they're federal employees that take up the executive agencies. But we saw a major shift in this country, and what the Trump phenomenon is all about is a reaction to that. It's a response. It's people wanting to return the country back to the people, where the people are sovereign, and not these government bureaucrats led by a strong executive power. Everyone on the left seems to complain about Trump and his power and what does it mean to have Trump in power. Well, Trump is trying to restore power to the people. He's actually trying to dismantle power and get rid of power, and he's using his office to do it. But that doesn't mean he's grasping for more power. It means he's trying to bring power back to the people that make this country what it is.
You know how I perceive President Trump? I perceive him as a kind of guy, he's made all the money in the world, all he wants to make. I think he sees this as his last hooray to turn the country around, to make it prosperous. That's how I see him.
Oh, he certainly doesn't need the job. I mean,
why is he on some island somewhere?
He's losing money every single
Oh,
day.
yeah, you heard that in Forbes magazine this past weekend.
Yeah.
He's lost, what, $1 billion, $2 billion, something like that, just from being president of the United States.
It's a lot of money to do this rather than what he could be doing, and so, I think you're right. I think he genuinely feels that this country is moving in a wrong direction, and that he is the right person to move it in the right direction.
That's right. I keep going back to the skating rink in New York, where they had just thrown millions of dollars at it. And years, it wasn't being rectified. And then so he bought it, and then said, well, let me handle it. So he turned it around. It was before Christmas, just a few months, spent less than $1 million on it, and made it profitable. I mean, it blows my mind. And I'm like, that's the guy we want for president. I mean, somebody like that who wants to turn it around and is not a politician, which is, I think, what we need at this point in time. So let's get back to Kavanaugh for just a few minutes.
Sure.
Where do you think that's going to lead the United States? How do you see things going in a different direction, say within 5 years?
Well, on the court, I think, I don't think Kavanaugh's going to really surprise anybody as a justice as far as his methodology goes and his commitment to textualism and originalism. But what will be interesting to see is what kind of cases the Supreme Court takes. Will Chief Justice Roberts, as the Chief Justice, as the administrator of that court, take cases that are politically controversial, or will the court seek to protect its legitimacy by taking fewer cases, at least fewer cases of major social consequence? Because the Supreme Court has discretionary review and doesn't have to be ruling on these big momentous cases that fundamentally transform the country. Even if there's circuit splits out there, the Supreme Court can leave those in existence and say, there are certain circuits that treat an issue one way and certain circuits that treat an issue another way. The Supreme Court isn't required to resolve a circuit split. So I wonder whether the Supreme Court's just going to back off a little bit and try to reinforce its image as an apolitical branch, or whether the Supreme Court's just going to go for it, and you'll start seeing rulings that will push back on things, and maybe you'll see Casey and Roe chipped away at. I don't think you'll see some kind of wholesale overturning of those cases, but you'll maybe see some cases that chip away at it and start restoring some power back to the states. But I don't know. Of course, a lot will depend. If you're talking next 5 years, will depend on who the next president is. Because I think if Donald Trump is elected again, some of this lawlessness and hysteria that you're seeing among protesters will turn into violence. I just feel that some of these people are unhinged and will take to the streets and start being violent. I mean, it's one thing now that they're going around and destroying private property and assaulting people and yelling horrible things, but I think you'll see them take it to the next step, and I think you'll see violence. Now, if a Democrat wins, it will largely depend on who it is. I mean, what's so funny is if the Democrats decide to run Joe Biden after doing the sexual assault allegations against Kavanaugh and against people like Roy Moore, and then you can just go on YouTube and watch videos of
he can't keep his hands off of anybody.
Yeah, he's throwing his hands all over people. So I don't think the Democrats would be smart to run him, but who knows? I really don't know what the Democrats are going to do. Maybe they're, obviously Elizabeth
Do you remember?
And if they ran as a ticket, then we would have the most left-wing ticket that the United States of America has ever seen.
Oh my goodness! You remember that? And I'll mention this about Joe Biden. The funniest one to me was, and I can't remember the guy's name. He was a military guy, and he was being awarded a medal, I think. And Biden gets behind his wife, is just massaging her shoulders. She's trying to get away.
Isn't it ridiculous? There's one where he goes to try to reach for Sessions' granddaughter, and Sessions walks there.
I saw that.
Away.
I saw that. And Hillary Clinton, don't forget that one. She was trying her best to get away from him, and he was just like, had his hands all over. But anyway, so what do you think is going to happen at this point to the accuser for Kavanaugh?
Well, I guess it depends on which one it is. I think I saw just a headline. I didn't read the article, but I saw just a headline this morning that Christine Blasey Ford is just going to kind of let it go. She's not going to try to push anything. Now, I think Deborah Ramirez has been in the news, and she'll probably push forward with something. Julie Swetnick will probably push something forward. I don't know exactly what that's going to mean, but those two ladies have accusations out there against Kavanaugh, and Swetnick is actually represented by Michael Avenatti, who is the attorney for the Stormy Daniels. So he's obviously out for publicity, and I don't know what's going to happen with those. And I really don't know what's going to happen with Blasey Ford. I have a feeling that news headline will be pretty accurate, that she's going to kind of maybe disappear from the scene. But I don't know what you're going to see with Deborah Ramirez and Julie Swetnick. I have a feeling they're not going away anytime soon. I wouldn't be surprised if you see people like that at the Democratic National Committee in the next, at the National Convention, in the next presidential election, up there speaking.
They'll be paraded around, I promise you that.
Yeah, they will be paraded around. Mm-hmm. Absolutely will be.
Well, you know something, on Friday's show, 1 o'clock, I had Sherry Height, who is the Executive Director of Family Services of North Alabama. And so we were talking about that, and I said, Sherry, what this whole thing really upsets me most about is women who are really being assaulted. It's going to make life harder for them, because of this craziness that happened over the past few months. And so Sherry and I were talking to women and men. She said there are a lot of men who are being assaulted that way as well. So we were just telling people on the show, go by, do what you're supposed to do. Go to the hospital, wear the same clothes. You were assaulted, maybe some DNA would be on it. And please call the police. Tell somebody, have a paper trail. Something like this really happens.
You're absolutely right, and that reminds me. I was listening to an NPR interview this morning as I was driving in. I commute from Auburn to Montgomery, so I drive in and out every day. And the interviewer on NPR was asking questions of some kind of Trump official. I didn't catch who it was, but the guy was saying, something about the protesters and saying that they were being, radical. And the interviewer asked him, "Oh, you think being against sexual assault is radical?" And the guy said, "No, of course I'm against it. Everyone's against sexual assault. No one's for sexual assault. But that's not what these protesters are about. They're about, if they were about that, they would be actually interested in getting to the facts of the matter and the truth and the bottom of what happened, and they would be accepting the FBI reports and the fact that there was no corroboration whatsoever of any of the allegations against Kavanaugh. And they would be they would not be content to ruin a man's career when there's no actual substantiated physical or material evidence against him. But what these people are for is just for complete lawlessness and for tearing down American life and institutions and fundamentally remaking it in a new way.
Mm-hmm. You got that right. I mean, and think about that. And again, what's going to happen, to women who are really having a problem? Let's go ahead and go to a break. We're just a little bit behind. Dean of Faulkner University, Thomas Goode Jones School of Law, also the executive director, the Blackstone and Burke Center for Law and Liberty. Welcome back. Good to see you.
Hi, Donna. I'm happy to be here as always.
Well, always glad to talk with you. And I know you always have the latest up-to-date info, and you and I kind of go back and forth. Most of the time we agree. I'm going to say about 99.9% of the time we agree on everything. But I wanted to mention the upcoming election. So what happened over the weekend? Do you think that has affected the amount of people coming out to vote, whether that be Democrat or Republican?
Well, I think if anything, it helped the Republicans because there was some concern, which is usually typical when you have a president and a Congress that are in the majority of one party. You get complacency, and there was some concern about voter complacency. And I think all of this stirred up a reminder among conservatives about how important the Supreme Court is and how important it is to populate the federal judiciary with great jurists. And so I think this has mobilized the right into a community of purpose in a way that would not have happened had Kavanaugh sort of quietly been confirmed. I think people see some of the protesters in D.C. that are hysterical and lawless and out of control and vulgar and crude, and they think, are these the people we want leading the country? I mean, the people that represent this, do we really want them controlling everybody else? Are those the adults we want to put in charge? And they think, no, that's not the type of person we want in charge. We want grown-ups leading the country, not children. And so I think this is really going to help Republicans. Now, Republicans are already kind of advantaged going into this, at least in terms of the Senate. And that's because there are 23 seats that are currently contested that will be up in the Senate that are held by Democrats, and only 8 contested seats by Republicans, and 3 of those are retiring, like Jeff Flake, is retiring. So, so just statistically, you would think that with 23 seats versus 8 seats on the Democrats will are at risk of losing more seats than Republicans, and indeed I think they will. And then you keep in mind that one of those seats held by Democrats is held by Joe Manchin, and because he voted yes on Kavanaugh, may keep it, and who knows, he may even flip Republican, as we were talking about earlier. So I think the Democrats are going to lose a lot in the Senate, and that gives Trump 2 more years to get some of his nominees through on the federal bench. If Trump were to win the next election, certainly I can't imagine a Breyer or Ginsburg up in the Supreme Court making it through another 4 years. One of them would have to retire if Ginsburg didn't actually expire before then. So there's a lot to watch. The implications of all these midterm elections are profound for the court and for the judiciary writ large. So we will see. We will see what happens. I don't know as much about what will happen on the House. Of course, all 435 seats in the House are up for election just because of the way the voting cycles work in the House. And there are just too many races of those races in the House for me to follow them all very closely. But I don't really know how those will play out. Those are very kind of context specific, and it's hard to know how particular counties and regions have transformed in the last 2 years if you're just not living in those areas. But a lot to look for, a lot to watch going into November 6th, which is when those elections will take place. So it should be very exciting. That much I think we can be guaranteed, especially with all those allegations of Russian interference and Chinese interference looming in the background. Mm-hmm. So who knows? Everybody watch your Facebook accounts.
Yeah, go on ahead and watch that. I've got to say something, though, about the protesters. My mother and both my grandmothers raised me to be like a lady. And I could see both of them ahead. If I did anything like that, they would all three hunt me down.
Yeah.
And hide me somewhere. I mean, I promise you, it's just not the way I was raised. I'm having a hard time. You can make a point. It's easy to make a point without being vulgar, and that's what we've seen so much of.
That's exactly right. I mean, there are reports of people defecating on pictures of Kavanaugh in the streets, people self-mutilating. This is just it's outrageous stuff. I mean, that to me is a sign of mental illness, and that we're celebrating it is really dangerous to me. It's like we're encouraging people to be destructive, all because there are people out there that oppose Trump. I mean, really, that's what this Kavanaugh hearing came down to, because Kavanaugh is just a moderate, sort of milquetoast judge when it comes down to it. He was not by any measure a right-wing extremist jurist. So the fact that the media and the protesters were able to successfully portray him as such shows how biased the media is.
And I think people are looking for other sources of news now. Something that's more, I hate to, say Fox News, balanced, but what I'm saying is, I don't know anybody in my circle of friends, and I have some liberals who are in my circle of friends who are actually watching CNN at this point. I mean, even they say they look on the internet for news.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. I tend to read my news anyway because for me it's just.
It's handier for me.
It's just, I mean, when you get two people up there and they're fighting it out, it's just not worth the rise in blood pressure. And I can sit there and read an article, and even when it's biased, I'm not going to get too angry about it. I can process the information, and I can look at who the author is and understand the biases before I get to it. And if I get halfway through it, I'm like, this is just a screed, or this is just scribbling. I don't have to read anymore.
You can read through that. It's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. We just received a text from one of our listeners, and he said he heard you say that this is possibly what happened with the nuttiness the past few weeks, possibly, against Trump. But he wants to know if you think it could be, and again, I'm reading abbreviated words, and this is from Paul, and Paul wants to know if you think it's really to get against Trump, or is it more like a war on men? What do you think?
Well, I think there's a little bit of both. Certainly there are branches of feminism that are just purely anti-men, and that doesn't apply to all feminism writ large. And they're just certain groups within the feminist movement that are just purely anti-men. And I think to the extent that those are the people who are out there voicing their opinions, then there is some anti-men stuff going on. But I wouldn't say that applies to everybody. I think what you really see going on is there's some senators and other leaders and people like George Soros who are funding a lot of these protests that see the Kavanaugh hearings as an opportunity to mobilize the mob and the masses, the sort of people that they think can be their sheep. And they know what they're doing. They know that this is nothing to be hysterical about, but they think if they can whip people up into a frenzy, then they can control them. And that's really what it's about. All these protesters are really just being used. They're being used for a political purpose, and they don't understand that they're just a pawn in someone else's game.
Well, that's what happens when you start building a group like that on emotion. And, I mean, that's all it is they're being built on emotion.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, if you can't just step back and say, okay, these are very serious accusations against somebody, and they could potentially ruin his entire life, we should step back and rationally assess the situation, examine the facts for truth, hear everyone's voice, and look for corroborating evidence. If we can't find that stuff, then you can't just,
And then you hear some people say, well, that's not enough. They should have brought her in. I mean, what else did you need to do? How many hours was she up on the stand? I mean...
Well, it shows that a lot of these calls for FBI investigation were completely pretextual anyway, because, you know, a couple of weeks ago you heard everyone say, well, you know, the refrain at the Kavanaugh hearings when Kavanaugh and Ford both testified was, well, we need an FBI investigation. We need an FBI investigation. Well, they got it, and, you know, 6-7 days later they're saying, oh, the FBI investigation is a sham. Well, then why did you call for one? Like, why did you think it was such a good idea last week? And then this week you think it's a sham and this, that, and the other thing. And, I mean, it's just, it really just shows how pretextual the call for an FBI investigation really was.
You know what this makes me think of?
I didn't actually think the Republicans would do it.
This makes me think of when I was a kid, and you'd have neighborhood kids would come over to your house, and if you didn't play it their way, they would take their marbles and go home.
That's exactly what it's like. That's exactly what it's like.
Let's be adults here.
It is the enlargement of childishness to a grand level.
I can't believe it. Okay, we're going to have to go and call it a day today. Thank you so much for being on the show, Alan. You're awesome.
Well, thanks, Donna. I loved coming on, and I enjoyed it. So thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you again.